Pavel and I we will start with some poetry. Thank you for mentioning our website, and it contains a lot of things indeed, but not much poetry. I will leave this slide on for you. But whenever I hear about the deployment of machine translation, I keep thinking that it reminds me of something, because when we talk translation, we normally talk meaning, quality, and translation is indeed an art, and we don't just optimize costs, but we appreciate the hard work that we put into finding the right word, finding the right equivalent. But finances are still one of the concerns of our clients. And I finally remembered what this discussion always reminded me of. It reminded me of a poem by Vladimir Mayakovsky, a famous poet. I changed it, preserving the rhythm, but replacing it with a plot that is related to translation. And the speaker is citing the poetry about how the client demands discounts and expects the same amount of work in return. Still, I will not go into the poem any longer, but I was thinking that it would be great to talk about how the clients get to this place. And here I think we should speak of it as of this second phase, because translation memory was phase 1. At some point they entered the industry, and when that happened, it was up to the client to decide whether or not the translator would use the memory. So it was a process, and same is happening now as well. We're starting to look into how to optimize it, because we keep aggregating data. And I remember back then, when we were just witnessing how it all began, and right now, it reminds me of what is happening now. There is this lack of communication, and I appreciate that Pavel here agreed to role-play with me. I will be this brave interpreter, and Pavel will be the client, discussing post-editing. It is the client's initiative, but instead of just agreeing with them, I will try to find out what they actually mean. And we are lucky that Pavel agreed to do this role play with me, because he's famous among his colleagues as someone who is eloquent, who has a story to every occasion. And I'm sure that we will remember what he tells us today. So again, I'm this brave translator, approach with a request to post-edit a piece of text translated by the machine. So I'm calling my client and I say, "Hello, Pavel. Hello to you too. How are things? Fantastic. And I guess you would like it to be more fantastic." Sure. And this is what we will be discussing today. And tell me this, Pavel. How did you come up with the idea of possibly deploying post-editing into the process, machine translation post-editing that we already have in place? Well, to start with, I would suggest that we open the next, that we display the next slide. It's been a pleasure for me to follow the stream, starting from the opening of this event, of this conference, starting with the opening speeches and up to the discussion that has just ended. And as Svetlana pointed out, I have witnessed a lot. I did my first translation using a typewriter, and it was perfectly normal back then. And I remember when back in 1993 I bought my first PC, they had this one condition. They needed their suppliers to be able to save the text on a floppy disk. No test translations, nothing like that. That's what was expected of you. Save things on floppy disks. And right now, I can't even remember when I received anything on paper last time. Maybe my accounting statements, but whatever information needs translation, everything is in the electronic form. We have files that are more or less standardized, and often from the moment the document is created, whatever happens to it happens using a computer. As soon as we learned to type, we started compiling various dictionaries, reference books, and no translator can manage without a dictionary, same as no soldier can manage without a rifle. But if you are talking about paper translation, it's like and regular translation against modern solution, it's same as if you would compare a machine gun to a pistol, for example. Right now, we have a lot of information aggregated in electronic form, and we use a lot of we deploy computers a lot, including for translation purposes, because machine translation is not something that aliens secretly shared with us. This is a solution that we evolved to. It was a natural process. So you mean that this is organic development? You would say that this is a natural process. Well, I would say it's not organic. It's silicon, because organic development, this organically is the way our interpreters develop, because I'm hoping that they eat well at the venue, but here, this is just a one-way process. Well, I'm still sad, because it could be a process, as you say, but as a translator who works with you, I need some more arguments, if you don't mind. Sure. Well, then my question is this, my next question. Are you sure we really need to go for post-editing, because we have different solutions to make our process more effective, such as the translation memory? For example, maybe we should look closer. Maybe we should explore that solution in greater detail. Well, translation memories are still going to be there, but the volumes, the translation volumes, they keep growing. And I enjoyed listening to the discussion that was previously held here And at some point, it seemed to me that the participants of the roundtable discussion, they started arguing over whether it is possible that a spontaneous request from a client is received and whether or not everybody speaks English. But I would say that it does happen. Sometimes you need interpreting and you need it now. Back to anecdotes. Actually, I think I could mention I could mention the invention of a telephone. When this invention finally got to Paris, they said, well, those Americans think of things all the time. We have special boys trained to deliver messages. The same thing is happening with translation. And those are normally not the translations that the end user does themselves using Google Translate, for example. No, this is usually done on a commercial basis, and the volume keeps growing. And I mean no offense to the interpreters or to the translators, but it is not always possible to hire a team that could join the process fast. And the question is, how would this translator or a team of translators, how are they supposed to complete the task faster? And we're talking experienced translators, of course, not the novices. And then my bullet point number 3 is that people read a lot these days. Some even read Instagram. And they have different expectations as to quality. And there's a client, a decent client, and they exist actually, even though I know that this has been widely debated among the translators, but they exist. And when it comes to practical application of things, solutions like this become acceptable, like post-editing of machine translation. In other words, this is the niche where you need things done fast and the quality needs to be acceptable. So you, my dear translator, can join the system if you practice a little bit before doing so. So you mean that you see the advantages, not just for yourself, but for the translators who work with you. You think they could win something from this? Well, I've been thinking about this for a while, and here's what I was thinking about precisely. Machine translation will never replace the translator, but it will change them. And unless you're willing to change, then somebody will replace you, and that somebody will be willing to make that change happen. So you can either make a living or make a decent living, like the previous, like Paul said. And machine translation in this context is a tool that would help a translator who has the qualification and is willing to learn make a decent living, and I am certain of that. Well, I am still not convinced, so if I may, I would propose that we proceed to the next issue on our agenda. This is something that our colleagues have been discussing. I mean, the pressure, the expectations from the parties involved in the process. Because the first thing that comes to mind whenever you think about the deployment of machine translation is the speed of how to speed up the process, is to how to optimize the costs. You need to somehow have the translator do more work and pay them less. Thus shaping the market about as regards the units that you use to measure performance and the rest. So how would you define the expectations that the parties may have, and how, if you have any comments maybe, and where the translator stands in that sense? Thank you for this question. And we should mention that translation is a service. Even though big translation companies, they have different departments, and we use that word. We use the word industry. We use those words. We use the word industry. We use the word department. But this is a service which exists while it is being provided, and it is inseparable from the client. In other words, managing the expectations is the key to long-term relationships. The budget managers that you see here on the slide, those are the key people in any company. So whenever we're talking about the deployment of professional machine translation that costs money, starting from buying the necessary equipment, starting from the purchase and up to the organization of the process. This is what corporations or organizations face whenever they make a decision on any sort of change. Back to that example, that history lesson with the introduction of phone connection in Paris. Normally, when you invest, you expect a return. I think you too have mentioned about the translator working more and making less money. And I don't think that's exactly true because, like I said, the core idea here is to increase the productivity of the team that you already have. And let's be honest here, if you are a developing organization, your needs are growing as well across different sectors, including the demand in translation. So you either keep hiring new people until the financial service finds out that you're doing it and comes to ask you why, or you somehow optimize, you find a more effective way to manage the existing processes. So you need to look for solutions that would allow you to do more relying on the same team that you already have. And if you propose them a 10% raise, that will let you manage the expectations more effectively. Same as when large companies were first introducing the translation memory.
It won't be translated in 1 year, but you know, the life is full of surprises, and there will some disappointments on the way, and you should promise budget managers that you could better foresee the work. It will be more clear and it's more reliable to train and to feed your existing employees than hiring people from outside. And you know, by customer, I understand not the one who is paying, but internal customer, internal client who requires the translation, and he doesn't know how much does it cost, but it's important to let them know that they get different service, and they need to understand the parameters of it. And I'm not a huge fan of the idea that post-editing machine translation won't be different from human translation. It will be different, it will be better as for me. And talking about translators, freelancers, they have three tasks: to get the translation, to make it, and to get a payment. And freelancing translators are the people who was the first to train their post editing, because it will be their net profit. I remember 2008 in Kharkiv. It was project Powwow. Gendry daughter came here, and I asked him, "What do you think about machine translation?" I remind you, it was 2008, and everyone was laughing. It was very similar to the famous pictures Cossacks are writing letter to Turkish Sultan. But it wasn't funny for Genry daughter. He said that the answer is wrong. You will be the first. You should be the first who will have it. So exactly to know your enemy, the translators themselves should be interested to get these skills, this technology, and about their profit. There is some interesting jobs, there is non-interesting job. There is non-interesting job with interesting payment, there is an interesting job with non-interesting payment. And also, there is a really interesting job that is well paid. And machine translation gives the possibility to increase the performance, because it will be less routine operations. And you remember I mentioned Bloom of the technologies, and when the translator was looking for something in the paper dictionary, he wasn't paid for that, he was paid for the word selected. And now we will have approximately the same. We will discuss it later, but the translator will be paid for his qualification, his or her qualification. If he or she knows the translation memory, his qualification is already higher, he has more chances. If he will have post-editing skills, he or she will have even more chances. And then the one who can drive, he can be a taxi driver if he or she needs. And the one who can't, he can be only a rickshaw driver. But it's up to you, to translators, to decide. Pavel, while we are still on this slide, do you think it's right that all the process participants, not just these ones, but the rest who might be interested in this process, still should try to negotiate? We still have time. Many people are thinking about standards in performance of post-editing, or some rate, how to calculate it by hour, or probably to give some discounts. So, are you agree that we need to talk to the customer the same way we are talking to each other? And what do you think? Is there a possibility to negotiate some kind of compromise? Yes, gradually I agree with you, but that there is no other solution. But do I still have the opportunity to impact this relationship, to find some compromise appropriate for both of us? Or it's too late? Yes, it's still possible. It's not too late. The most important in any kind of communication: do not reject any ideas from the very beginning. That is the core idea of our today's conversation. Just to play with some ideas, some thoughts, to give our audience the food for thought, the ones who are watching it from abroad, or the ones who will do it in the future. Because while our mind is flexible, we can find some solution. But if we will stand on the way of progress locomotives, this locomotive will move forward anyway. And now there is a time when professionals The ones who have huge experience of using different automation systems, including the elements of machine translation, should be involved into this discussion actively. They should collect their own stats, because let's be frank, our existing model in the sector, when you're paid by hours or by word, is not perfect, because words can be different, texts are very different, and the customers are expecting different results. That's why that's why this process, how to make finished product of text from the or of words, can be different, because for instance you can spend 2 times more money on some text from your field of specialization. But with post-editing, probably there will be a completely new profession, someone who will evaluate the quality. For instance, this timber that is cut next to UTIC, before making new buildings of it, we need to dry it, we need to prepare it, we need to think about what to do with this timber, how to use it, and for translators, it is the same. It's important for them to participate in this conversation, to try to collect their own database, because a few years ago it was still possible to add medical dictionary to prompt, and after that to have a good laugh trying different combinations. These times are over, and I think that now it is an appropriate time, when the future is now. Someone is post editing already, and someone is not. But I ask everyone to make active research and to try. Probably we can ask dear conference organizers to propose some kind of round table or discussion, not scientific discussion, probably it could be webinars. It is interesting because still we have the opportunities to discuss it, because this process is not frozen so far. But Pavel, I understood that the locomotive of progress is moving and we need to be part of it, but still, probably some share of translation still will be human. Yes, it's understood that automation is connected to our development, to the clear future, but there are some areas, and they are known to everyone, and you can't imagine it without manual translation. Probably now we can discuss service levels, the ones that will be kept, and probably you can see some kind of links and interactions between them, or maybe there will be completely different levels of service and different people will be specialized in that. How would you see this proposal that we will have a few components? So everything that I think about it, I tried to list in these 3 bullet points, and I want to repeat what I already said. Everything is here already. It is here with us. And service levels are defined just by one variable part, and it was already discussed at UTIC. I mean the level of responsibility for the result. That's why when I or someone else want to buy something cheap, for instance, in China, So you know any translation will do fine for you, because you will look at the image, you will look at the price, and you will understand that most probably it will be a pot, and probably you will even know the size and understand when you will have it at home. And the same when people book some mini hotel. And I will come back to the former discussion, and I need to tell you that even in Italy the owners of mini hotels don't speak English. That's why they use Google Translator. We use Google Translator to negotiate with them. And this machine translation will cover 99% of the workload, of the contacts that is being generated. People are ready to watch videos with automatic subtitles. If someone agreed already for non-perfect result, he has a right to use machine translation. So he will be responsible himself for the result of this decision, right? Yes, you know, he is consumer, he will be responsible. There is just one problem, and we had this problem before we had post-editing, where some naive translator was trying to give back to LSP machine translation, and after that there was the whole story with appeals to the public that I translator was offended, and usually in the network everyone was on his side, and after that he shows his translation and the public wasn't on his side anymore, and it was already checked for many times that the most cruel criticism is coming from the fellow translators. And from 2003, from the time we started using Trados and all the elements of Trados, translation memory I mean, and now these systems will give different levels of correspondence, and also they are trying to make the whole picture from the puzzle. It is a kind of micro neuron translation that is trying to compose something. That is a translation that can be used in 90% of all the text translated in the world now. Also, it is the most reasonable way to translate documentations under review. And also it is a pragmatic approach, because it is the same system, and one translator as excavator driver can dig a hole quicker and better than few people with manual tools. But the responsibility bears on translator, because he doesn't care what he gave, and it doesn't matter did he do it in CAT or in some other tools. And purely manual translation is our favorite transcreation. When there is a motto today, tomorrow Toyota, for instance, we get Toyota manage the dream, or Toyota drives the dream. Surely machine translation cannot do that. Not even all the humans or CAT tool can do it. But you need it when you need to trick someone or to convince someone, and still machines are not good in tricking. That's why if you want to describe the advantages of the hotel that wasn't built yet, it's better to make a text about it and to relate it with the help of humans. and also some confidential translation when the paper with the text is burned after translation, and translator is burned as well. But when the responsibility level is maximum, still there are thousands of certified machines. In every niche we can have something like that. And we can see that the scopes are reducing in every level. That's why for the one who is considering long-term career, I would like to advise to manage these tools. But can you imagine the one who proposes all three levels of this service? Yes, sure, I can see this person in web camera. For instance, I was in organization committee in Sochi. We were getting prepared for Olympic Games. Our vendors helped us a lot, and we translated ourselves during the lunch break sometimes. And one time, the people addressed to us, they had an article in Japanese, and I looked at this article and I understand that I need to send it to vendor, and tomorrow he will send it to me back. But we tried Google first, and we understood that this article is just about 1/3. That there are very beautiful talisman in Sochi. I'm talking about bear, leopard, and some other symbol. And I told them, thank you very much. This machine translation was fitting this case very well. I don't think that some son of some Japanese translator went to bed hungry because of that. But I think that is a good example when the wolves have eaten much and the sheep wasn't touched. You know, at my desk there are two things: in text calendar and Trados software. I still have two groups of questions. Let's discuss about small practical issues. For instance, you convinced all the translators working with you that it is just one more tool that will make them more attractive in the eyes of their customers because they can process more and to provide the result of translation quicker, and it is a need, but still human translation will be needed in more creative part of the job. But we agreed some wonderful rates that will be implemented. And we didn't discuss yet the opinion of translator who doesn't consider post-editing an option for this particular translation. But after post-editing, we will implement the process. And what do you think from the customer side, from the translators or translation agency side who agreed to participate in that? What about the budgeting, training, and depletion of this system? What possibilities can wait us on this way? So we will do this, and what we need to consider them.
I would say that first of all, we need to define the word budget. It's a financial plan. And I don't think any changes are possible if you don't have the money, because even your volunteers will need to eat something, and you need to have a provision for that. So you need to define your goals clearly. You need to know the money, how much money you need to invest, and you also need to think about the time that the task will take, because it's not easy to work and learn at the same time. Because if you convince your translators to to support this solution or replace those who are not willing to support it. But either way, say you have a team in place, then it would be nice to allocate the money and to hire a consultant. I think Svetova, there's this great consultant, Svetlana Svetova, your full namesake. She's expensive, mind that, but she's good. So you need to budget for that, and you need to have reasonable expectations. Don't expect the things to change overnight, to start a new life tomorrow. So if we're talking about training your people on your team, it will take time. They will train specifically to do the job, or they will learn on the job. And this applies both to your staff members and to your freelance partners. Sometimes when new people join the project, they are given some trial period, say some time, to familiarize themselves. And it's also true for those solutions. When you employ technologists, they need time to master. And you also need to think about the time when you undertake a project, how much time it will take, and then you need to have a scalable solution in this respect, because I've been working with many clients, and I believe that any change should start from A, enough time, and B, from being tested or piloted on a limited group. Because no matter how an information system is tested by professionals, as soon as the real user logs in, they will break it, no matter how you test it. And you don't need a gypsy to tell you this fortune, because implementation of technologies such as post-editing and machine translation, that has a technical component and other elements. The implementation itself will take 3 months, just as any other serious change. And if there's something you didn't plan for, some new circumstances, or maybe some options, you can discover it during that time. And the manager that you assign internally to be in charge of your machine translation, they will learn to process client requests, and they will learn how to process those that can be processed, and to explain to the client if something cannot be done. If we're talking testing the system, you have to schedule those tests, and you have to allocate enough time to perform them. And normally, people gradually learn, and those who don't, you just get rid of them. What is there to say? No one will be admitted or taken to that future. I know, and I was glad that you are talking about training, because I'm glad you mentioned it and you said so much about it, because to me this means respect to the person, the expert we are talking about. And now, as to what expects any translator when they are transformed into a post-editor. How do you see the expectations of the client who has this perfect picture of the world, who has everything automated and optimized, but still at the heart of that picture there is a human, a translator or post-editor, if you will. So what skills should they have? What kind of training specifically should they get? is it their own responsibility, or is it the responsibility of the client to make sure that they have as many people as they need trained with the respective training? And finally, what about the consent of the translator to be transformed into that post-editor? What a scary word. Well, human being is a wholesome entity. It's really difficult to separate any element and analyze it as an isolated unit. We need to keep in mind the end result, something that the client expects, that their team expects, and maybe the whole organization or the country. Because, like Pushkin said, translators are those horses that drive the progress, or if we want to learn to do things fast, and if we want to learn to do them well, and this is the skill that we are supposed to have, if you really want to get something done, you will find a way. Otherwise, you will look for reasons why not do it. We might have mentioned this already, but I think we should say it again expressly. There are certain engines, there are certain texts, and when they meet, the result is incomprehensible. It's impossible to be honed in any way within any reasonable amount of time, and you basically have to start from scratch all over again. So your post-editor needs to be trained to tell one from the other, to tell what needs editing from what doesn't, and from something that has to be discarded right away. So if you need to, and for that, you need a system, you need to evaluate performance, you need to double-check the evaluation, you need someone to say and to see whether the automated process, whether something went wrong in the automated process and whether something needs to be corrected manually. First of all, you need to learn to spot those critical mistakes. Those neuro solutions, like it has been said already, they provide a seemingly smooth product, but it contains errors, and you need to be able to identify those errors. I'm sure that you've heard about the tests of those driverless vehicles. They have drivers to monitor the process and to interfere if something goes wrong. Same is true for the post-editing. Just recently, this driverless car with a driver, they hit a pedestrian, and the pedestrian died. So this person inside the vehicle was so used to the idea that machine is in control of the process that they didn't think of interfering. And it's up to the prosecution, to the investigation, to find out why and to find out the particulars. But when we're talking about machine translation, you need your post-editor to be able to spot those errors and to motivate them when they move from the translator to editor and to post-editor. You need to be sure that they do not lose any single skill or competency, that they only build on them. For example, I have this experience as an editor, and whenever I open a paper and I see a typo, I immediately notice the typo if it's there, if it's on the page. Even if I don't look for them specifically, I see them. So this is what I'm saying. mastering those tools, learning to use them is important, and that skill will stay with you for the rest of your life, like in case with the translation memories system. I once had to translate a very specific technical text, and then in 11 months, I did my research, but then in 11 months, I had a girl calling me and saying that we had someone recommend you as a specialist in this very technical issue, and our client needs 50 pages a day. I said, okay, send them in. I'll take a look. I looked at it. I felt what they call a déjà vu. I had a Tradas, so I ran it through Tradas, and turned out I had just 8 pages to translate. So that's what I did, and I took their money, and I've been telling this story ever since. Same can happen to you. Sometimes, at some point, you just might receive a text from your client who is not yet requiring you to use machine translation, but you will see that you could use it, and you will. So you need to have the knowledge. Pavel, do I understand you correctly that you are encouraging the translator to be proactive, to learn and to get the skills that they need, instead of waiting until the client asks them or approaches them with an assignment like this, such as this one, right? If, of course, the translator agrees to, at some point, become a post editor. We had this conversation with our client, and by the way, if we're talking about whether or not clients can have such requests, yes, it's true. They can ask you to do this at some point, and when they do, you need to discuss. If there is something, they can provide you with some additional materials, webinars, or what have you, and whether they are willing to pay extra for you to get the training. If they bring you this bad translation and they say post-edit it, but you have some other assignments from other clients, then good for you. Don't take this one. But half of this year's UTIC, I think, was devoted to the topic of machine translation. So just look for ways how to apply this knowledge, because our colleagues seem to waste their precious time on finding and editing or taking pictures of some silly translations. They could maybe take pictures of their own translations to illustrate their ideas. But I would suggest that they rather look for ways to be prepared for that first order when it comes in, because when it does, trust me, you will need no further convincing. Because some texts are so bad, sometimes some source texts, that you don't even want to translate it. And then it's up to you. If you have the qualification, especially if you have post-editing skills, then you make this choice whether or not to take the order. If you don't have the skills, then there is nothing to discuss. So you need to improve your competencies to master the technology and to use it for your own benefit. Thank you, Pavel. And let me add that this was probably just a tiny portion of what we could discuss here, but this was a sample dialogue, a role play that was supposed to illustrate the topic and how complex the issue of machine translation is, and we need to talk about it. We need to talk about it with our clients, with other industry operators, with our partners, and I'm hoping that this conference, which I am lucky to be attending, and it's too bad, Pavel, that you are not here, because that rooster was accompanying us. I don't know if you heard him. But we're hoping that this wonderful conference, we will keep talking about it at this wonderful conference and in future as well. So we are hoping that you enjoyed this role play that we did for you and it inspired you. We will be very happy if it did. Thank you, Pavel. Thank you. I don't know if Pavel can see us, but it was great to listen to you, Pavel, and you, Svetlana, as well. You were great in your roles and your arguments were convincing. I wasn't there when the phone was invented, but I was there when people were laughing at the idea of machine translation and translation memories. But now, several years after, nobody is even debating it anymore. Everybody is using it. And I think that post editing of machine translation, the same will happen here. So do you see anything else on the horizon, some innovation that is moving at us and that can just run over those who will not be fast enough to jump right on? And the question goes to Svetlana. Svetlana? I think that in the future, this is just, I cannot predict anything for certain, but the book by Harari that everybody is reading now, he's very honest and he says that if you hear someone predicting the future for you, don't trust them because there is no such person today to have the knowledge to predict anything. So I will not dare predicting the future, but I think that soon we will need to master a set of tools customized for us that will meet our own unique needs, some unique technical profile. So we will have to select, or those tools will be selected as based on the way that we do our job. At some point, we will be using machine translation and we will post-edit it. For other tasks, we will use dictionaries of some sort. So the process will still be automated and adjusted to the skills and needs of the translator. But at the same time, we should be aware that this requires extensive analysis of data, and the more access we give to what is happening inside our heads, the more dependent we become on the result. And I find this idea mesmerizing, this machine translation that we're discussing today. At some point, this was in the translator's head, and this was a good equivalent that ended up in the database and then contributed to the development of machine translation. It's here and it's growing because it's feeding on the translator's output and what they produce based on the years of experience that they have accumulated. So I think we need to balance this at all times. I mean, to what extent and whether we automate what we do. I don't know how the situation will unfold, but I can say that when you work with a certain document, you have the analytics, you know, the tools that you are using, the sources that you are using. This will all be accumulated. And then next time, the machine or the system will prompt you that, hey, this is this great example that you found last time, use it now. This is how automation will become part of our life, but I don't know what is going to happen tomorrow. Svetlana, just if I may add, as to what's coming after the post-editing, I think the ability to adjust will be the next big thing, and I dare say that in the future, provided the further development of the technologies, the work of the translator will look like this. They will have to click a certain amount of times at the very beginning, of the document, then further into the translation they will need to do fewer clicks, and then in the end hardly any. So this is the next stage that we are approaching when we're talking about the development of the artificial intelligence, but it's still in the embryo state.
I can add on that. You know, we are discussing some futuristic things already. I was listening to Paul Filkin very attentively, and he made the same mistakes that all of us did in 2008. He told that now it requires such a calculation opportunities that you won't be able to do it. And in 5 years, in your smartphone, you'll have self-taught system that will make your translation with your mistakes and even putting the comment that, oh, here I didn't understand something. All the development of IT, all mechanic things will be mechanized. You know, this previous session about the remote interpreting, when the interpreter wakes up, goes to the computer, and he can make conference interpreting from home. And the same with you, when you have a text, when you have pictures from the website, and there is a face of the person online, and he can ask him, do you understand? You don't understand? Can I say it in some different ways? It's also kind of evaluation. Why at the beginning of commercial translation we always ask for the first few pages to show to the new customer. So how to do it? A little sad, a little funny. It was an old cartoon, old Soviet cartoon. It was called Film. And you know, there was a picture when it was no too solemn, too funny, and when it is too funny, they put some funerals in. Everywhere where we have some time delay, get to know the order, opening of the database, added translation, augmented translation. Svetlana, I was waiting for this term. Pavel, I don't use this term because there are 8 options how to translate it, and any of them is confirmed. It will be approved by calculating facilities. Now it's not possible, but just in one night it can become possible. For instance, you translated it at day, and at night time it could edit it and will give it to you in the morning. Our future will be bright. That's rather optimistic forecast if you compare it to previous discussions. Any other questions? Yeah, you know, mine will be very comfortable place. Thank you very much all. Thank you very much, Pavel. Thank you very much. Wonderful quality of